Before fiberglass, before outboards, before modern marinas and ski towers, there was one name every boater knew: Chris Craft. They built mahogany dreams with chrome accents and V8 thunder. Hollywood stars lined up for them. Bootleggers outran the Coast Guard in them. And for nearly a century, they didn't just sell boats, they sold freedom. But somewhere along the way, things changed. The brand faded, then it came roaring back. This is the untold story of how Chris Craft revolutionized boating, and why its legacy still shapes every hull today. It all began in a boathouse in Algonac, Michigan. In 1874, 13-year-old Christopher Columbus Smith built his first real working skiff. Not a toy or model, but a boat that local duck hunters actually paid him for. It was fast, sturdy, and it worked. Word spread, and by his 20s, Chris and his brother Hank were building boats full-time, earning a reputation across the Great Lakes for craftsmanship and performance. In 1910, Smith partnered with a businessman named John Ryan to form the Smith-Ryan Boat Company. Their goal? Fast, affordable runabouts that didn't compromise on quality. Their design stood out at national boat shows and made waves in racing circles, pushing the name Smith into the boating spotlight. But the real transformation came in 1922. Chris and his sons launched a new venture, the Chris Smith and Sons Boat Company. Within 2 years, they rebranded as Chris Craft, a name that would soon become synonymous with American luxury on the water. What made them different was their approach. While other boat builders were crafting one-off vessels by hand, Chris Craft embraced assembly line techniques inspired by Detroit's auto industry. They built from templates, used specialized crews, and implemented dealer networks. All unheard of in the marine world at the time. And then there was the look. Gleaming mahogany hulls, brass fittings polished to a mirror finish, cushioned interiors that felt more like a Packard than a pontoon. Chris Craft didn't just build boats, they built statements. By 1927, Chris Craft was the largest builder of mahogany boats in the world, producing close to 1,000 boats a year and consuming more than 1 million board feet of hardwood annually. They weren't just building for buyers, they were building a culture. A new way of life centered around style, leisure, and speed on the water. But the golden glow of the Roaring Twenties wouldn't last. The Great Depression was about to hit, and the waves were coming fast. Also, by the way, do you love stories like this? Hit subscribe and let us know, which Chris Craft would you take out for a ride? Now, just when Chris Craft was rising fastest, America hit its hardest crash. The stock market collapsed, factories closed, and the dream boat suddenly became a luxury no one could afford. Most builders folded. But Chris Craft didn't just survive, they adapted, reinvented, and did something no one in the industry had dared before. By the end of the video, you will find out how they pulled it off. The Roaring Twenties came to a screeching halt in 1929. The stock market crashed, banks failed, and suddenly luxury was no longer in style. Survival was. For most boat builders, that spelled doom, but for Chris Craft, it was the start of a hard-fought reinvention. As demand for high-end pleasure boats collapsed, Chris Craft pivoted fast. They didn't double down on exclusivity, they did the opposite. They introduced a new line of more affordable models, like the 18-foot utility, designed for middle-class buyers who still craved leisure even if the budget was tight. They also rolled out one of the most forward-thinking ideas in the boating world at the time: installment payment plans. Instead of asking customers to pay thousands up front, Chris Craft let them finance their dreams. Boats became attainable for Americans, who even in the Depression refused to give up the idea of freedom on the water. Behind the scenes, they refined their production even further. By streamlining the build process and simplifying components, they kept quality high and costs manageable. They even trimmed model lineups to avoid overextending resources. But they weren't just thinking about civilians. Chris Craft also started building vessels for the US government, light patrol craft, utility boats, and other small vessels that quietly kept revenue flowing when private sales slowed. It wasn't glamorous work, but it kept the factory lights on. And through it all, they never abandoned their signature woodwork or style. Even the budget boats still had gleaming mahogany decks and chrome details, because no matter the economy, a Chris Craft had to look like a Chris Craft. By 1939, as the world edged towards war, Chris Craft had done what few companies of the era could claim. Not only had they survived the Great Depression, they came out stronger, and just in time, because a much bigger storm was on the horizon, one that would take their boats from sunny lakes to the front lines of history. When the United States entered World War II, Chris Craft didn't hesitate. They halted all civilian boat production and dedicated their entire operation to the war effort. The move wasn't just patriotic, it was transformative. Over the course of the war, Chris Craft built more than 12,000 military vessels. That included landing craft, patrol boats, rescue boats, and utility transports. These weren't fancy mahogany runabouts anymore. They were rugged, mission-critical machines built to perform under fire. Their landing craft carried troops ashore during Pacific invasions. Their crash boats rescued downed pilots in enemy waters. Their patrol craft guarded harbors, rivers, and coastlines across the globe. Every one of them built with the same attention to quality and precision that had made Chris Craft a legend in peacetime. But war production did more than keep the company afloat. It advanced their capabilities. Chris Craft gained access to new materials like aluminium and early composites. They developed new construction techniques, including modular assembly lines and advanced propulsion integration. By the end of the war, they had scaled up to a level of industrial boat building few others could match. They also earned a new level of trust. The US government relied on Chris Craft not just because they could build fast, but because their boats worked. Reliability wasn't a sales pitch anymore. It was a matter of life and death. When the war ended in 1945, Chris Craft was no longer just a luxury brand. It was a national name with military credentials and industrial muscle. And most importantly, it had the attention of tens of thousands of returning servicemen who had ridden their boats in combat and now wanted one of their own back home. And kind of wild, right? One minute they're building lake cruisers, next thing they're making boats for war. If that caught you off guard too, give this video a like and subscribe for more stories that go way deeper than you'd expect. And hey, would you have guessed Chris Craft built landing craft? Let us know in the comments, we read them all. Now, the war was over, peace had returned, and America was ready to play again. Chris Craft was about to launch into its most glamorous and profitable era yet. Post-war America was booming, suburbs were expanding, incomes were rising, and families finally had time for something new: recreation. For many, that meant heading to the lake, and what better way to arrive than in a Chris Craft? The 1950s and 60s marked the golden age for Chris Craft. Their name wasn't just known, it was desired. The company introduced a dizzying range of models, from compact utilities to 50-foot cabin cruisers. At one point, Chris Craft offered over 150 different boats, with options for families, weekend warriors, and even wealthy yacht owners. And then there was the clientele. If you were rich and famous, you owned a Chris Craft. Elvis had one. So did Dean Martin. Frank Sinatra was often seen cruising Lake Tahoe in his, with a drink in one hand and a cigarette in the other. In Hollywood, the name Chris Craft meant style, class, and a little bit of swagger. Their boats were more than transportation. They were fashion statements. The 1955 Holiday, for example, featured twin inboard engines, automotive-style dashboards, and chrome so shiny you could shave in it. Mahogany decks gleamed under the sun. Everything was handcrafted, from the upholstery stitching to the varnish finish. Each boat left the factory not just seaworthy, but showroom ready. Chris Craft's genius wasn't just in engineering though, it was in marketing. Their ads didn't just sell horsepower, they sold moments. A dad teaching his son to drive, a couple riding into sunset, a family laughing under a canvas bimini. Owning a Chris-Craft wasn't about owning a boat, it was about owning the dream. And with boat financing now normalized and trailerable models available, the dream was finally within reach for middle-class families, not just millionaires. By 1960, Chris-Craft was the largest boat manufacturer in the world. Their name was iconic, their boats were beautiful, their brand untouchable. But the thing about being on top, it's easy to get comfortable, and while Chris-Craft was still varnishing mahogany, a silent revolution was bubbling beneath the surface, one made of fiberglass. By the late 1960s, a quiet revolution was changing the boating world. Fiberglass, lightweight, durable, and easy to mold, was taking over. And while Chris-Craft had flirted with the material since the mid-1950s, they were still deeply rooted in wood. Other brands weren't. Companies like Sea Ray and Boston Whaler were going all in on fiberglass, building boats faster, cheaper, and with far less maintenance. No sanding, no varnish, no swelling seams. Just hose it off and go. Chris-Craft did respond. Their Commander series, introduced in 1964, was one of the first successful fiberglass cruisers and proved they could adapt. But it wasn't enough. Internally, the company was struggling. After decades of family ownership, the Smiths sold Chris-Craft in 1960. What followed was a string of corporate takeovers, each one pulling the brand further from its roots. In the 1970s, the new leadership tried to modernize. They released more fiberglass models, they experimented with new engines, they even trimmed the lineup, but the magic was fading. Chris-Craft boats no longer felt like the status symbols they once were. They were competing on price, not prestige. Meanwhile, their competitors were innovating. Sea Ray was refining hull designs for smoother rides, Bayliner was undercutting prices, and brands like Grady White and Wellcraft were dominating coastal markets. Chris-Craft, once the name in American boating, was slowly becoming a legacy without a future. Worse still, quality control began to slip. Reviews became mixed. Dealers backed out, and by the 1980s, the brand that had once set the standard was losing market share fast. In 1989, after years of declining sales, Chris-Craft filed for bankruptcy. For many, it felt like the end. A beautiful, storied brand swallowed by change, mismanagement, and a failure to evolve fast enough. But legends rarely die quietly, and in the shadows of its collapse, Chris-Craft's comeback story was already beginning to take shape. When Chris-Craft filed for bankruptcy in the late 80s, most assumed the brand was gone for good. A beautiful relic of boating's golden age lost to time, but some legacies are too strong to sink. In the early 1990s, a small group of investors began reviving the Chris-Craft name. Their mission wasn't to chase volume or compete with the budget brands. It was to rediscover what made Chris-Craft special in the first place: timeless design and uncompromising detail. They knew the future wasn't in wooden runabouts, but it wasn't in generic fiberglass either. So they found a middle path. The new boats, like the Launch and Corsair series, brought back the essence of vintage style: flared bows, tumble-home sterns, teak decking, and the unmistakable silhouette that screamed Chris-Craft. But underneath the beauty, state-of-the-art hull design, composite materials, and modern power plants from Mercruiser and Volvo Penta. The strategy worked. These weren't mass-market cruisers, they were boutique builds for buyers who wanted something different, something beautiful. Suddenly, Chris-Craft boats started turning heads at boat shows again. Reviewers called them art you can drive. Celebrities began buying them. So did collectors. Chris-Craft wasn't trying to be the biggest, it was trying to be the most iconic. By the early 2000s, Chris-Craft was back, not as a giant, but as a symbol, a niche brand for those who valued heritage, craftsmanship, and aesthetics over spreadsheets and spec sheets. Each model was limited in production, each finish was immaculate, and each customer once again felt like they were buying something personal. It wasn't just a comeback, It was a rebirth on Chris Craft's own terms. And while the boats looked back to the past, the brand itself was moving full throttle into the future, armed with new ownership, modern tech, and a clear vision. Today, Chris Craft isn't the biggest name in boating, but it might still be the most iconic. Now headquartered in Sarasota, Florida, and owned by Winnebago Industries since 2018, Chris Craft operates as a premium, low-volume boat builder focused entirely on craftsmanship and character. Their lineup includes the Calypso, Launch, and Catalina series, ranging from 24 to 35 feet, all infused with design cues from the brand's golden era. Modern Chris Crafts are not mass-produced. Each one is hand-finished, teak wood trim, stainless hardwood, leather-wrapped dashboards. These aren't optional upgrades, they're part of the DNA. Even their gel coat colors are custom-mixed for that signature tone that catches light just right. Pricing starts around $150,000 and climbs past the $500,000 mark depending on the model. But you're not just buying performance. You're buying presence. Chris Craft customers today aren't chasing speed records or offshore trophies. They're chasing a feeling. The boats ride smoothly, they corner like sports cars, and every single detail, from the stitching in the upholstery to the vintage-style gauges, feels considered, intentional, legacy-driven. And it's working. Chris Craft remains a boat show standout. Marine critics praise their finishes, balance, and distinctiveness. In a sea of boats that all look the same, a Chris Craft still draws a crowd at the dock. It's no longer about being the fastest or the cheapest. It's about being the most unforgettable. Which brings us full circle, back to a teenage boy with a vision, a handmade skiff, and a name that would one day define American boating. So how did Chris Craft change boats forever? They literally created the blueprint, the look, the luxury, the dream. They showed the world that boats weren't just transport. They were aspiration. They industrialized elegance, democratized the American boating dream, and redefined what it meant to own watercraft. Sure, others came later with flashier tech or smarter business models, but none captured hearts quite like a Chris Craft cutting across the lake at golden hour. Mahogany glinting, exhaust burbling low. That's the real power of a Chris Craft. It's not just about where you go, it's about how you feel while getting there. If you ever see one docked, stop and look closer. You're not just staring at a boat, you're looking at history. Thanks for watching.